Welcome to this session of the Tourette Association's virtual conference. I am Evie Contolis, Development Associate and Team Tourette Manager at the Tourette Association of America. Thank you for joining us today for Tourette and Law Enforcement, How to Have Positive Interactions and Safe Encounters. We would like to take this opportunity to thank our Platinum sponsors, the Warner Fund and Pharma, as well as all of our donors and supporters for making this free conference possible. To support educational programming like this, you may visit tourette.org/donate to make a contribution today. During this session, we would be very happy to hear from you and include your voice in the conversation. You may ask questions or share comments using the question panel on the right side of your GoToWebinar player at any time. We will collect your questions and address them during the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Heather Ramsey.
Hi, thank you so much. I am excited to be here today to talk to you about Tourette and law enforcement and how to have positive interactions and safe encounters. As Evie said, my name is Heather Ramsey, and I am the director of the TAA's Greater Carolinas Tourette Group, and we service North and South Carolina. What I am not is a doctor. Nor am I a member of law enforcement. So all of my experience and information comes compliments of learning from the Tourette Association, as well as from interacting with law enforcement and first responders. Both my son and daughter have Tourette syndrome, as do I. So as drivers, this information that I'm going to share with you has been helpful for us. The objectives we're going to talk about today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Tourette syndrome because I'm not sure who all's on the call. Hopefully we've got some law enforcement officers, but I am assuming we've got drivers or up-and-coming drivers. Talk about some resources the Tourette Association offers, the importance of communication and how that is critical in interacting with law enforcement, co-occurring conditions and disinhibition, and actual encounters with law enforcement, what you can do, de-escalation techniques and high-risk encounters, and in order to have safety, advocating will be the most successful. Facts about Tourette syndrome are it's neurological, neurodevelopmental, and 1 in 100 have Tourette or a tic disorder. What's shocking is 50% go undiagnosed or are misdiagnosed. So the average onset is anywhere from 6 to 8 typically, and before the age of 18. There's no medical test and there's no cure. Treatment varies from one person to the other. So managing your tics has been successful and helpful for many people, and environmental factors can also contribute. The best resource I can tell you about is this Tourette card. The TS card explains in a concise way what Tourette syndrome is. There's one for Tourette, and there's one if you also have coprolalia. I highly recommend you download this card, get it, and put it in your wallet. Tourette, as I mentioned, is widely misunderstood. If 50% of the Tourette community are going undiagnosed, that means health professionals are not familiar with it enough of the specifics. So it's understandable and highly probable that the law enforcement officer you interact with will not be familiar with it. As I mentioned, communication is key. It is critical for success. Obviously, when you're interacting with them, you don't want to compound the problem. Don't be rude and argumentative. Keeping it simple helps. And knowledge is power. Know what Tourette syndrome is. Know how to advocate for yourself, have a concise explanation of what Tourette syndrome is, and practice it. The more you practice it, the more you're going to be able to explain it in stressful situations. You want to be compliant and explain that you are being compliant. Build the trust, talk to the officer, start a dialogue and have conversations. That's the best way to let them know you're being compliant. You're setting the scene for success. Answer the questions that he may ask you. Ask to clarify if you're not sure what it is. And many tics may be perceived as suspicious behavior. And if you have echolalia, for example, that can be viewed as being disrespectful. So letting the officer know up front about that is really helpful. Tips for all you Touretters out there: high stress situations, environments, excitement, sickness, those kinds of things make tics worse. So be mindful of that they can often be perceived as being purposeful or disrespectful. You may be perceived as being rude or argumentative. We all know we can't control it, and it's up to us to let law enforcement understand that we may have a hard time staying still or remaining calm, but we want to let them know up front that we have Tourette syndrome and we're not bad, we just are different. Having a Tourette card is vital, even regardless of your age. It's always good. Highly recommend you have one on your person at any age. Co-occurring conditions are often more problematic than tics themselves. 86% of people with Tourette syndrome have a co-occurring condition. So there's a high probability you have a co-occurring condition, and that can contribute to making a situation a potential for a negative outcome. Excuse me. Disinhibition, even if you understand it's inappropriate, you have the inability to control certain things you say or do. Tourette is a disorder of disinhibition. So you may overstep boundaries, seem impulsive. Another way to say it is your brakes fail. So the filter in your brain, or what one person may be able to stop if they don't have Tourette syndrome, they may be able to not say things, but your filter is broken. So it's important to let the officers know that you are not trying to be disrespectful if you do say something. For example, disinhibition comes out if you see a sign that says don't touch wet paint. You're probably going to have a hard time not touching the wet paint. It's up to us to inform others that these behaviors are not willful. Sensory processing disorder causes a great anxiety and for many people who have Tourette syndrome. The sense of sounds and touch, bright lights, those things can create a lot of anxiety and make it impact the situation and make it very frustrating. So it's important that you let law enforcement know if you have sensory processing disorder. Sorry, little technical difficulty. Some tips for Touretters: if you have sensory processing disorder, it can result in extreme sensitivity to touch and sound, which can lead to exaggerated responses. Let the officers know in advance that you have sensory processing disorder. There's a video that I wanted to show that's excellent in a perfect scenario of how poorly a situation can go if you have sensory processing disorder and the officer doesn't know. If you're a law enforcement officer, I highly recommend you give advance notice. If you need to detain someone and put them in cuffs and you suspect they have sensory processing disorder, or they tell you they do, let them know in advance that to prepare themselves that you're going to touch them. The video, unfortunately, was taken down from YouTube. The account was closed, so I'm not able to show that, but it did give a very good example of what not to do for a law enforcement officer. Behavioral issues can also cause problems and make situations problematic. If you are frustrated you have sensory overload, emotional overload. Those all can create a sudden outburst of rage. That's one of the biggest problems for those of us with Tourette syndrome. A minor disagreement can blow up and escalate alarmingly. It can be a normal conversation, gets a little frustrated, and explosive rage or shouting, hitting, throwing things. So advocate for yourself so law enforcement understands why you may not act like the next person. You're not bad, you're just different. Dr. Kathy Budman said explosive rage actually is one of the most common symptoms that occur in people with Tourette syndrome. Now to the nitty-gritty. I know I covered a lot of information quickly, but hopefully you've taken some other sessions during this conference and you are familiar a little bit with what I've covered so far. Encounters with law enforcement. I'm going to talk about 3 different situations: driving, domestic situations, and if there is an encounter at a business that where there's a disturbance. Everyone has a role to play. Law enforcement has their role, but also as people with Tourette syndrome, we have a role to play. So this will help you be prepared so you know what to do. We all have a responsibility in this. Most people at some point in your life are going to need to drive a car, so you need that skill. Some states have different requirements for getting a driver's license. It may be classroom time, it may be driving time, or a certain number of hours of driving. Regardless, driving a car is a huge responsibility and should not be taken lightly. If you have Tourette syndrome, you need to take your training a step further. Before you start driving, it's really important that you do a few things. Executive dysfunction has a high rate of prevalence in those of us with Tourette. So look and learn what documents, look at the documents and know what they are that you will need if you're pulled over or if you're in an accident. Know where your driver's license is, either in your pocketbook or your wallet. Put your Tourette card with it. Make sure, even if you need to take them together, make sure that you always have those 2 together. Vehicle registration, know what it looks like, and your auto insurance carrier, know who that's with. States may require different things, so find out if you need additional information. What I recommend is putting all of that information, the vehicle registration, the auto insurance information, an extra Tourette card, and any other information your state requires in one location in a pouch or a Ziploc bag. That could be the glove box or the center console. But when you get stressed and you're being pulled over or you've been in an accident, you want to have a quick way to remember where it is and what you need. And this way you don't have to think about it. Encounters with law enforcement could be being pulled over or in an accident. So let's say you're being pulled over by law enforcement. I want all of you to pretend like you're sitting in your car and you're driving down the road. I'm going to give you some steps to take and I want you to practice them. I know it might seem silly, but it will make a difference in the difference between success or a possible negative outcome. I came up with these when my children started driving. My son started driving 6 years ago, and I realized it may become a problematic encounter because he has Tourette syndrome. So I came up with these steps, and they really have been helpful, not only for him, but also for my daughter. First thing, you want to look for an area that's safe and pull over. You want to put on your hazard lights, put your car in park, roll your window down, and turn off your car. That lets the officer know that you're being compliant. Put your keys on the dashboard and put your hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. I wish I could see you to make sure everybody's doing that, but I trust you're following directions. Next, when the officer approaches, you want to make sure you're polite and respectful and follow instructions. He will more than likely ask for your license and registration before you move to get it from your predetermined location. Make sure you explain that you're going to move and where you're moving. Officer, my license is in my back pocket and my registration is in the glove box. I'm going to get them now. Then slowly move and get those documents. Make sure that you present your Tourette card with your license and the documents. Then replace your hands where the officer can see them. Hands in pockets or hidden make officers nervous. Lastly, answer questions respectfully. Even if you're unsure of what's being asked, a lot of people with Tourette syndrome have auditory processing disorder. So you may not understand what he's asking you to do, or he may give you a few commands and you can only remember one or two. It's not a problem to ask. Now, I want you to imagine you're driving down a 2-lane road. You're about 2 miles from your house. All of a sudden, you look in your rearview mirror and you see flashing lights. Oh my gosh. Your pulse starts quickening, your palms are getting sweaty, you got a million things going through your mind. I don't know, I can sense it right now when I think about this. But don't worry, never fear. You've had this training and you're prepared. We're gonna have a positive experience. Few notes to remember that's very critical. If you have severe Tourette, you have coprolalia, or you have tics that involve sudden movements, you need to present your Tourette card immediately, as soon as the officer approaches. Do not put yourself in danger. Advocating is key. Obviously, with the 50% undiagnosed rate, many doctors are not familiar with Tourette syndrome. So it's understandable and highly probable that the law enforcement officer may not be familiar with it. Now, another scenario. I want you to imagine this. This is actually a situation that occurred with my son. You're driving along, approaching a stoplight, and you turn on your blinker, you know, oh, I gotta go to the store, get in the left lane. You check, make sure the left lane is clear, you double check your rear view mirror, and as you're going, before you can even turn the wheel, you see brake lights. Bam! Person in front of you stopped suddenly and you didn't have time to stop. You hit them from behind, but you were only going 10 miles an hour, so the damage is minimal. However, the police are called. In this scenario, we're assuming there are no injuries. I imagine these may be a few thoughts you're thinking. Oh my God, my parents are gonna kill me. My tics are going crazy. Oh no, am I gonna be able to explain this in chronological order? Or am I going to start the series of events of what happened in the middle and then jump to the end and then go back to the beginning? Oh my gosh, my tics are going crazy. Okay, I need my documents. Where are they? Oh no. Okay, maybe I can remember. Yes, I know where they are. How am I going to pay for the damage? Oh, great. And my tics are going crazy. No worries, you've got this. After an accident, first thing you want to do, take a deep breath. Again, we're assuming there are no injuries. Take a deep breath. You know where your registration is. You know where your documents are because you have them in a predetermined location. So go and get those out first thing. Your Tourette card is with your license, even if they're taped together if need be. So you know you've got that. Pull those out. You know who your car insurance carrier is with, because it's with your vehicle registration, all in that pouch in your predetermined location. When the officer arrives on the scene, what I highly recommend is that you present your Tourette card to him before he starts taking statements or gets explanation of what took place. That will, you explain you have Tourette syndrome and stress increases your tics, so you've got more tics, and you just wanted to let them know in advance why you may be acting different. Again, we're not bad, we're different. It's also helpful, as I mentioned earlier, to find out in advance what information your state may require if you're in an accident. some tips on what not to do. And this is best practice in all aspects of our life, but don't be rude, aggressive, or hostile. That is not going to be a recipe for success. Don't interrupt, don't argue with the officer. If they pull you over, don't start moving around and getting your wallet out and your documents out from your predetermined location. Think about what the officer is thinking in the vehicle behind you. He doesn't know what you're searching for. So set yourself up for success and wait until he asks for the documents. Again, don't put your hands in your pocket. That makes officers nervous. Don't assume law enforcement knows about Tourette. Again, if the medical community doesn't have a good grasp on it, law enforcement more than likely will not. And most importantly, do not be ashamed of having Tourette syndrome. We didn't ask for it. Excuse me, I get a little emotional. But we can advocate for ourselves, and that will be our biggest key for success. Now, domestic encounters, situations that may occur in the home, they are concerning for families and for law enforcement. Now, families understand that these explosive outbursts that I mentioned earlier stem from Tourette syndrome. And if you have co-occurring conditions, that probably is complicating the matters even more. However, law enforcement is not going to know that more than likely. So it's up to us that we communicate that. But it's also important that we remember a few things: context and intent. Those are two critical pieces of information that if you ever have a domestic situation, you need to make sure you communicate this information correctly and accurately when calling the police. So you call the police, again, critical, context. Explain it's Tourette syndrome and their co-occurring conditions. Explain the intent. There's no criminal intent. That will or may drive the outcome of what happens at the end of the situation. If you have a child with Tourette syndrome or you experience explosive outburst, remove the trigger. So if I'm a trigger for my son, I need to remove myself from the equation. Don't engage. Don't try to reason with the person with Tourette syndrome. That's not going to do any good. Give the Touretteer space. All those things will help make a successful outcome to avoid calling 911. But if those don't work and all else fails, call 911 for help. Again, I need to stress, some states have different mandates on what law enforcement must do when they respond to a domestic situation. So it's highly recommended that you explain context and intent. Dr. Jankovic says that younger children, emotional disinhibition may manifest as temper tantrums, self-injurious behavior. Anger outbursts occasionally lead to rage attacks, and this may force frightened parents and other individuals who are victims of these violent rages to contact law enforcement. In severe Tourette cases, patients who hit, choke, or throw objects uncontrollably with extreme emotions of anger or frustration are common in TS parents, coworkers, and peers. The majority of the patients, however, report a desire to suppress these inappropriate behaviors and frequently express remorse to the victims. This is why it is so critical that you explain the context and the intent to the officers. We're going to have another domestic scenario that I want you to think about. Think of it as if you're looking in on the scene. Imagine there's a family at home for the evening and mom and dad are having a discussion with their child with Tourette syndrome, Tommy. The subject of the conversation makes Tommy anxious and his tics start increasing. His co-occurring conditions are complicating the situation, and before you know it, you see Tommy go into an explosive rage. He starts screaming and throwing things. Then he turns around and punches a hole in the wall. Now, as the situation continues to unfold, Tommy suddenly grabs Mom, pushes her up against the wall, holding her by her neck. Oh no, Tommy's explosive outbursts haven't been this bad before. So Dad's obviously very concerned for their safety. Dad doesn't know when the outburst will subside, so he calls 911. He's hoping the police can intervene, calm down the situation, and call for medical assistance if needed. In this situation, what should Dad tell the dispatcher to make sure we have a positive outcome? It is critical Dad explains intent and context. So when you're calling, explain you are concerned for your child and would like police and medical assistance. Explain there are exigent circumstances. Disclose your child has Tourette syndrome. If he has any co-occurring conditions, explain those as well. State your child is experiencing an explosive rage outburst, and they commonly occur in people with Tourette syndrome. Then explain your child has no criminal intent with this outburst. It is part of Tourette syndrome, but it's not because he's bad. Again, we're not bad, we're just different. Some things to remember that are really important. If it is said during a 911 call, the dispatcher must include it in the notes and communicate it to the responding officer. Now, in these situations, it's stressful, it's fast-paced, there's an urgent need for response. So the information the dispatcher takes down may or may not be accurate. So words are important. Communication is key, but what you say and how you say it are the keys to success. Some states mandate, as I mentioned, an arrest be made at the end when they're responding to a domestic dispute. So be sure to provide the context and the intent. Laws and policies and procedures vary from state to state and even within jurisdiction to jurisdiction within the same state. So I recommend you finding out what those are. Do your best to remain calm and communicate with the officers on the scene. A lot of times, if there's no criminal intent, medical assistance is the best resolution because arrest and jail are not. Next scenario we're going to talk about that you may encounter law enforcement is if you're out shopping in a grocery store or the mall. The American Disabilities Act of 1990 protects individuals who have a disability. You don't have to have a severe disability, and it doesn't have to be permanent. And Tourette syndrome does qualify as a disability under the ADA. Employers are also required to provide reasonable accommodations. In 2008, the ADA Amendments Act broadened the definition of disability. So we know we're covered by the ADA. Do businesses have rights? Yes, they do. They can establish their rules for admitting or banning anyone from the property. But they cannot prohibit admission or ban a person from the property on the basis of discrimination of a disability. Under Title III of the ADA, they cannot refuse you admittance based on your disability. Understand these protections also extend to parents. So if you are accompanying your child or your friends are with you in the mall, anyone helping you and assisting you in asserting your rights is protected under the ADA. And the condition, again, does not have to be severe or permanent. So imagine this. You're in a business. You and your friends are going to ShopRite. You're going to buy some candy. You have Tourette syndrome and coprolalia, but hey, your friends are great and they know it's just a part of you. You're scoping out the candy aisle and you're approached by management and asked to leave due to your inappropriate language. You attempt to explain Tourette syndrome. You even hand him your card. He wants nothing of it. He is not listening and doesn't care. You're frustrated because you just want to buy some candy. Finally, he calls the police to have you removed. When the police arrive, the manager explains that you were yelling cuss words and there were even little children around. He asked you to leave and you refused. What do you say to the responding officer? This is how you handle your business. You remain calm. You can't control your Tourette syndrome, and you know that. You need to make sure they understand it, law enforcement and management. Offer your Tourette card to the police and management. Again, you're not required to, but it's going to go a long way in providing a positive outcome. Explain you have Tourette syndrome and it's a neurological condition. You can't control it. When you're explaining Tourette syndrome is a disability covered under the ADA, be calm, be respectful. They may not be familiar with ADA, or they may not be familiar that Tourette syndrome is covered under ADA. State you understand their concern, that it would be alarming, and you understand that. And then offer to educate them on Tourette syndrome, educate them on coprolalia. If you could control it, you would. Overall, education is the best defense. Now, not everyone is going to end up, sadly, with a positive outcome where the police and the management accept this. So if you have difficulty with store management or with officers, reach out to the Tourette Association. And if you are a member of a chapter support group, reach out to them. They can help guide you on providing education or get involved and provide education so this doesn't happen again. If you think it doesn't happen, it does. You may have seen this, you may have heard of other instances where someone was asked to leave a business that had Tourette syndrome. Josh Erder, who is a fellow Touretteer and also a youth ambassador for the Tourette Tourette Association, was asked to leave Planet Fitness. And shockingly, the staff knew he had it and he knew he couldn't control it, but they told him to leave, that he wasn't welcome there. Now, Josh goes, really? Your slogan is judgment-free zone, but you're judging me. So you can imagine that's humiliating and a violation of his rights clearly, but it's just so sad that other people are intolerant. So that's just a snippet of an event in his life, but sadly, it's not an isolated one that occurs. So if you encounter a difficult situation, reach out to the Tourette Association or your chapter support group. Some things worth noting. Education is the best method overall for resolving business situations as well as future situations. You have the right to frequent an establishment, just as everyone else does, but you do not have the right to be disorderly. So make sure you're calm and respectful and polite when you are responding, even if store management or law enforcement is not doing that with you. Couple things of important notes. You are not protected under the ADA if you pose a direct threat to the safety or health of others. And again, like I mentioned, you're not required to show proof of your disability, but it may go a long way towards a positive outcome. Some problematic factors that will play into things. And it's legitimate that others confuse Tourette as something else. Some tics resemble actions or characteristics of someone using drugs. So explaining that it's Tourette syndrome will allay fears of others. The explanation of events, like I mentioned, your recall may be way off. You may start a story in the middle of it, and then you may go to the beginning, and then you may jump to the end, and then back to the middle. So it's important. That can be perceived as someone on an upper. So explain, I may have difficulty in telling you this whole story. Give me a minute, I'll get it all out, but it's gonna take time and I may jump all over the place. Fidgeting, a lot of times resembles drug withdrawal. So keep that in mind. Tic explosions and meltdowns can resemble someone in an altered state of consciousness from drugs, but it also can resemble someone with criminal intent, because there are bad people in the world, and the police do need to protect us from them and protect themselves. Again, the best defense is education. Explain the situation. If you were in an explosive rage or you were in extreme distress, just say, I have Tourette syndrome. If it's possible, explain more. Explain your out of sync timeline. Explain your reason for the outburst. Explain why you're moving your arm this way or why you're rolling your eyes. You're not being disrespectful. It's one of your tics. And then finally, the TS card. If I say it one time, I'm going to say it 100. That is a vital resource for you to carry at all times. Again, as I've mentioned, I'm not bad. I'm a little different. I have Tourette syndrome. Now, law enforcement is well versed in de-escalation techniques. The public may not be so well versed, so I'm going to give you some. Verbal de-escalation techniques can truly increase compliance on the individual's behalf and reduce escalation. Unless the person is making direct threats to an officer, their best approach is to use verbal skills. Ask them, is anything wrong? If they're having suspicious motor tics, say, I need you to put your hands on the steering wheel. So hopefully, if there's some officers out there, you are familiar with this. And for those of us Touretters, understand that if they give you commands or they ask you these questions, they are trying to de-escalate the situation. Officers rely on their training. They have to protect themselves and contain the situation. We need to make sure they understand we are not bad. We have no criminal intent. We have Tourette syndrome. And educating them on, I'm not rolling my eyes at you to be disrespectful, it's a tic. Demonstrate patience on both parts, patience and understanding. The officer is protecting himself and you want to protect yourself. The key though is calm, remain calm and communicate. Finally, slow it down. Don't rush things. Rushing things only makes you more anxious, tics worse, and the less information is going to be heard. In stressful situations for officers out there, it is really important that you give the Touretteer the opportunity to speak without interruptions. If you're taking a statement, a witness statement, or a victim statement, it's important that you let the Touretteer explain it in their own time frame. If you try to rush it, it's going to be very frustrating for you and for the individual with Tourette syndrome. So we're doing the best we can to explain it and get all the facts out. But if we have motor and vocal tics, it can be difficult and time consuming. So be patient. I tell the officers when I do training, sit back, relax, and take a sip of coffee. Just let them talk and you'll get it all eventually. But it'll take longer than someone without Tourette syndrome. Bottom line, the end goal of any encounter with law enforcement is a nonviolent outcome. Remember, it's important to advocate for yourself, but it's not just about you. When you advocate for yourself, whether it's with an officer or a business or the public at large, you are paving the way for success for other people with Tourette syndrome that officer or business owner or community member may encounter in the future. So kind of a double benefit there. And lastly, the most important thing is everyone gets to go home safely, the officer and the person with Tourette syndrome. That should be the goal. Remember, you can be right and dead. So be very careful and make sure that you explain why you're acting the way you act. Give them the Tourette card. That gives credibility to what you're saying. and it explains Tourette syndrome in a concise and clear manner. There's always time to sort things out later. It may not be right, but again, it's better than being dead. So if you are arrested, there is always time to sort things out later. And that's an important factor to consider. Lastly, safety, safety, safety. Safety is absolutely important. So protect yourself. The officers are going to protect themselves. Again, I mentioned the Tourette card, and I highly recommend you get it. It is available on download at tourette.org/TScard, or you can order a hard copy if you call 1-888-4-TOURETTE. Again, any age, I highly recommend this. It is critical to successful encounters, not just with law enforcement or business owners or medical personnel, but also the community at large. Because a lot of times you're in public, you may be at the park, and someone may come up to you and be offended, or they may not understand why you're doing something you're doing. So having this card can be very helpful. I saw a clip yesterday on YouTube where a YouTuber was in the ocean surfing, and all of a sudden this other person yells, "Shark!" And he's like, what? And the guy goes, "I'm sorry, I have Tourette syndrome." Now, we can laugh about that because a lot of times if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry. So having the card, probably, the guy was like, "Oh, okay." And, he had some other random outbursts. So the guy was clearly, okay, he's got Tourette syndrome, not a big deal. And he probably wouldn't give him a card, in the ocean, but it's a way to break the ice with someone else, and it gives credibility to what you're saying, that you have Tourette syndrome. Again, education. So some things to remember, really important. Communication, 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 and once again, communication. That is key. So make sure that you are speaking clearly. It's not just important to communicate what you say, and how you say it is really important. I'm going to review one more time what you should do if you're pulled over or if you have an accident. It's really important that you follow these steps because, again, we want to make sure we're all safe. When I was interacting with my son when he first started driving, I realized he may not know what to do and how to do it. And in the climate we're in today, it's really important that we advocate for ourselves and ensure that our safety as well as law enforcement safety. If you're being pulled over, look for a safe area, pull over to the side. Turn on your hazards, put your car in park, roll your window down, and turn off your car. Those are nonverbal cues that tell the officer you're being compliant. You're not going to run away, you're not going anywhere, and you're compliant. Then, to be on the safe side, so he knows where your hands are at all times, put the keys on the dashboard and put your hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. That shows the officer, again, a nonverbal cue of you being compliant. And it assures him that he knows where your hands are at all times. And your keys on the dashboard, you're not running away. When the officer approaches, be polite and respectful. Don't be rude or argumentative. He may ask you if you know why he stopped you. Be honest. No, I don't know. Or yes, I may have been going over the speed limit. Whatever his instructions are, follow them. Before you move, so if he asks you for the documents, before you move, tell him, "Officer, I'm going to reach into my back pocket and get my driver's license. It's in my wallet. And my documents that you have requested are in my glove box. I'm going to get them now." So he knows that you're not making a sudden movement to grab a weapon or do any kind of nefarious behavior. So state what you're going to do before you do it. If the documents are requested, which they more than likely will be, slowly move to retrieve them. You've got them in a predetermined location. You know what they are, and you can pull them out. Next, absolutely present your Tourette card with your license. Have an extra backup copy in your pouch or Ziploc bag of your documents. That ensures that you always have one handy. Replace your hands where the officer can see them. Again, you don't want him to think you're reaching for a weapon or trying to hide anything. Answer the questions respectfully. Again, you may have auditory processing disorder, so you may not understand everything he's asking, or you may need him to repeat the questions. If he's giving you commands to do, you may need him to restate what he wants. But you're being compliant, and it's important that if you see the officer getting frustrated, explain, I am doing my best to be compliant. I'm struggling. I'm having difficulty controlling my tics. I'm very anxious. It's a stressful situation, so my tics are worse. Talk to them, build trust with them. Again, there is always time to sort out the rights and wrongs later. I'm not here to say that all situations are solely the fault of the driver or solely the fault of the officer. Everyone has a role to play and a responsibility. And so it's important that we remember that and do our part. The Tourette Association of America has a fantastic resource in the Law Enforcement Toolkit. When I go and train law enforcement, I provide them a copy of this. It may be helpful if for you to visit your local police department and sheriff's department and provide them with a copy of the Law Enforcement Toolkit. That will help educate them on Tourette syndrome. You could also carry one in your car, maybe put it with your documents in the predetermined location, so you can offer that. If the officer is not familiar with Tourette syndrome, you can provide them a copy. The great thing about these is they're free. So go to Tourette.org and download a PDF of the toolkit, or again, you can order a hard copy by calling 1-888-4-TOURETTE. Cops have a calling. It's not about making money, certainly. They have a desire to keep people safe and protect others. So understand that they are there to help. The majority of cops are there to help because they feel a calling. One thing I have always said, and again, it goes back to, I'm not bad. I have Tourette, I'm just a little different. I may be different, but Tourette syndrome is only a small part of me. It doesn't define me. And I make sure that I tell everyone that in our support group, as well as my own children and to myself. Be the person you wish others were. I may not remember everything that you say, but I will always remember how you made me feel. So understand that you may not like the way someone else is acting or responding to you, but you're responsible for your own actions, not theirs. So be the person you wish they were. I know I've covered a lot of this information in a short amount of time, so I am offering my email address for you to contact me if you have any questions or concerns about anything that I covered today. Again, I'm not a doctor and I'm not law enforcement, but I do have a passion of learning everything I can about Tourette syndrome and how it affects a Tourette's daily life. And I absolutely love providing training to law enforcement. I can do that over Zoom if you're in a state that isn't North or South Carolina and you want your law enforcement agency is open to having training. I can easily do that on Zoom. If you're in North or South Carolina, I can do it in person or on Zoom. But having that information provided to them is critical. So feel free to give me an email, greatercarolinastourette@gmail.com or TikToktour@gmail.com. TikTok Tour is an advocacy awareness effort our family created in 2014 after my son became a youth ambassador. Used quite a few resources to create this presentation that I hope you have enjoyed and got a lot out of. I would like to thank the Tourette Association. They have fantastic resources. The TS card, I can't emphasize enough on how important having one is, as well as the Training for Law Enforcement Toolkit. I would also like to personally recognize and thank Lieutenant Roger Harrington in Florida, a sheriff's deputy who provided me guidance and helpful information on what law enforcement wants. He also has Tourette syndrome. Tanya Sokol is his wife, and many of you may be familiar with Tanya. She's very active in the Tourette community. She is a firefighter and first responder and has also contributed to my knowledge of how to react, how to act, and how to provide law enforcement training. And she's in Florida as well. There's some other additional resources that I used. And now I want to thank you so much for participating in this presentation. Again, I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you are learning a lot throughout this whole conference. I am now open to any questions you may have, and we've got some time. Evie, do you want to?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Heather, for an excellent presentation. We will now begin answering the questions submitted during the presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the questions pane in your control panel. If we are unable to get to all of the questions, we will follow up after the session with responses. Additionally, here at the TAA, we have a full-time information and referral staff available to assist you by emailing support@tourette.org or by calling 1-888-4-TOURETTE. That's 1-888-4-TOURETTE. So now let me just see here. We did receive a lot of questions that are mostly geared towards law enforcement, but let me just see. We have what would happen with ADA protection if you had undiagnosed Tourette?
Well, if you aren't, that's a good question. If you don't know you have Tourette, then you wouldn't know you have a disability. So that's a tricky question. If you don't know you have Tourette, you don't know you have a disability, so you wouldn't know to say, I'm protected, I'm a protected class. That's a very good question. And the law enforcement, one thing I've discovered is they are not as familiar with ADA and the protections that it provides to those with disabilities. So if you think you have Tourette syndrome, I would highly recommend you seek a diagnosis. Then you know you will be protected. If you suspect it or want to learn more about it, reach out to the Tourette Association. There are competent providers who can provide a diagnosis, and that will give you peace of mind that if you are in a situation, you can rely on the ADA for protection.
Thanks, Heather. So someone said, is the TAA seeking to train law enforcement about TS? And I'm going to say that you shared in your presentation that you do help train law enforcement about Tourette syndrome, and you can always reach out to the Tourette Association of America. We have medical cards, as Heather mentioned, and toolkits specifically geared towards law enforcement that you can call us to or email us to get and share with your local authorities. Is there anything you'd like to add to that too?
Yes, I would love to. I would absolutely say unequivocally, yes. The Tourette Association created the Law Enforcement Toolkit, which is just an invaluable resource that every officer can have. It has a card in it that they can keep on their person about de-escalation techniques It's a brief overview of Tourette syndrome, but it's highly informative. All of the training I have done, I have had the full support of the Tourette Association, and I'm very fortunate to have participated in a lot of their training, so I am able to talk about Tourette syndrome. I have it. I wasn't diagnosed until my son was. At the age I was 40, so I grew up not knowing what was wrong with me, and I had to learn to hide it, because we all know if you get bullied enough, that's not fun. So I learned to hide it. So I wanted to make sure my children and other kids don't encounter the same obstacles. So absolutely, the Tourette Association is very interested in training law enforcement to learn more about Tourette.
Okay, and now we have, what happens if the officer does not allow you to speak and tells you to be quiet when you try to tell them about Tourette syndrome?
The great thing about having the TS card is it does the speaking for you. That encounter may happen. The officer may be in a bad mood. He may have perceived already your tics as something disrespectful. A picture is worth 1,000 words, I say. So provide them with the Tourette card. He's asking for your license, put the card with it. Then he will have it in his hands. Put it with the documents. Make sure they understand it. I can say from personal experience in our family, we have not encountered a situation where law enforcement did not appreciate receiving the card, whether it be at a traffic stop or in an accident. And my son did have an accident, as I mentioned, and he did provide the Tourette card. He didn't run up to the officer or anything like that, because that might make him nervous. But when the officer did approach him, he handed him the card and he said, I just want you to know, if you see any odd movements or weird sounds coming from me, I have Tourette syndrome. And he handed him his card and he said, you know, I'm not bad, I'm just different, I have Tourette.
Okay, so another question we have here is, are you aware if there's an equivalent of the Tourette card in Canada, or do you know if Canadians can use this as well?
I want to add something real quick on to the last question that I thought about. If you do encounter a situation where the officer is not respectful back, he's not acting the way you are acting, for example, that is a perfect opportunity to contact your chapter support group to provide training to the law enforcement community in your area, whether it be the police department or the sheriff's department or highway patrol. That's an opportunity for education. You advocate for yourself, you do everything you can. If they're still not willing, then that's a time for the whole department to take advantage of the training offered. And by the way, the training is free. So it's a win-win for everyone. For Tourette in Canada, I'm excited to say, I know we have a Tourette Youth Ambassador from Canada, so she may also have this question. I would say, I'm not an expert, but if I lived in Canada, I would get this card and use it. I don't know, Tourette syndrome is not exclusive to the United States. People all over the world have Tourette syndrome, all ages, races, creeds, everything. So I would say this is a good factual card regardless of where you live.
Yep, and once again, you can reach out to the Tourette Association of America to get that card mailed to you. We are approaching 2 o'clock, so thank you again for a wonderful presentation. This is all the time that we have for this session. Once the session is closed, you will receive a survey on the presentation. We would greatly appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of the webinar. Additionally, the webinar will be posted on the TAA's YouTube channel for those who are unable to participate today. We encourage you to reach out to us about this webinar or for other resources and opportunities to connect. On behalf of the Tourette Association, thank you again for joining us for this presentation. This presentation was presented free of charge thanks to our generous donors. If you appreciated this session, we welcome you to support the organization. May 15th, which was yesterday, started Tourette Awareness Month, and we welcome everyone to get out and get active and register for Miles for Tourette. Please visit us at teamtourette.org to learn more and give.